Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett, and today I thought we'd explore a strange episode that occurs when people are taken on board a UFO. There are many strange experiences people have, but this is definitely one of the strangest. It's known as the breathing pool. And what a breathing pool is, investigators are not sure, but abductees, experiencers, are placed into a vat or a tank or a tube of liquid and instructed to breathe it. It's apparently not water because people report that they are able to breathe this stuff into their lungs. It's often a very disconcerting, certainly, and frightening experience for abductees. So let's just get right into some of the cases. David Jacobs was one of the first to really write in detail about this, and I'd like to give you a direct quote from him. According to David Jacobs, and I'm quoting, "The aliens bring the abductee into a room with a large tank or even a small swimming pool in it. The aliens tell her to get into the tank. The liquid is clear, and at first glance looks like water, but it is not water. The abductee is told to submerge herself in the liquid and stay there. She may be scared that she will drown, but the aliens reassure her that she will be all right. She gets in over her head and then is told to breathe. She finds that she is able to breathe normally even though her head is underwater. After a short time, she is told to get out. Sometimes the aliens dry her off, but most of the time they do not. The purpose of the pool procedure is unknown." Now, he says he has gotten a number of cases, Dr. Jacobs. He does quote one. That's the case of James Austino, who was having abductions by gray-type ETs. He said they placed him into this, not a very large tank. It was about 4 feet high, and they placed him in there. He sank right to the bottom. Was filled with this liquid, which he said was body temperature, thicker than water, and he immediately was able to breathe in it. He said they pulled him out a short time later, and it was so thick he had to sort of rub the liquid off his body with his hands. So it's sort of like a gel. Another case comes from Carla Turner in her book Into the Fringe. She writes about the case of Fred, who found himself inside a tank with no way out. He was sure he was going to drown, and said he had no choice but to finally breathe in the water and relax when he found out he could breathe. It's not the only case coming from Carla Turner. In her book Taken, she outlines the cases of a number of female abductees, at least 2 or 3 of which have had the same exact experience. One was Beth, who found herself immersed in a very heavy liquid and was amazed to still be able to breathe in it. Another is that of Lisa, who in October 1993 was made to enter one of these pools of breathable liquid. This is not super common, but a number of experiencers have reported this. Kim Carlsberg wrote an excellent book about her experiences called Beyond My Wildest Dreams, and recounts a dream or a dreamlike episode in which she remembered breathing underwater. I worked with another abductee, Mike Evans, who co-wrote the book The Coronado Island UFO Incident with me. He's had experiences his whole life. He has one very clear memory of being stuck in this aquarium-like tank and was able to breathe the liquid underwater. Betty Andreasen, of course, has experienced this. She's been referenced in a number of my videos. She's had a lot of these very strange onboard UFO experiences. And she described the same thing, being placed in sort of a chair-like device, actually, part of which came down from the ceiling, filled up with liquid, and she was told to just breathe it. It was very scary, and they told her that this is how they transport people. What I find very interesting about this case is I have another one almost exactly like it. I interviewed the guy personally. His case is featured in my book Inside UFOs. I call him Taylor. And Taylor had been wondering how the ETs are able to transport people when these objects are darting around at right angles. And they gave him a demonstration, took him to a room. There was this large chair made out of clear plastic, like acrylic. And just like Betty Andreasen described, part of it came down from the ceiling and enclosed him and filled up with liquid. He thought, what are they trying to do, drown me? And they just said, just breathe, just breathe. And finally he had no choice but to breathe, and was very surprised to see that he was able to breathe. And the ETs told him, this is how we transport people. So that seems to be the main theory. Researcher Yvonne Smith has written about these cases, one in her book, Chosen, an excellent book. She talks about the case of Mary, who had a very scary experience with the breathing pool. She describes it very much like James Austino did, about 4 feet high, sort of like a very large bathtub. These gray type ETs just put her right in it and submerged her. She said it was a greenish liquid. It reminded her kind of antifreeze. And she thought for sure she was going to die. They were drowning her. It was in a complete panic until finally, again, she had no choice but to breathe and found that she was able to breathe. So there are quite a few cases like this. One from England, another guy I interviewed personally. I call him Gary. His case is featured in my book, Onboard, UFO Encounters. And he had an experience, he's had experiences with grays his whole life, but woke up on board a UFO inside one of these tanks. A number of cases are just like that. People suddenly find themselves in these tanks. He said it was fairly large, like bathroom-sized. His wife was with him, and both of them were able to breathe perfectly well, without distress. He saw grays walking around on a level above them. They were enclosed in this tank. And he also saw what he believed to be human-looking figures, perhaps even CIA-type individuals or military. He couldn't tell for sure, but they certainly looked fully human. So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what to make of these cases. There's a couple that were reported to MUFON. One is from an abductee in Lufkin, Texas, who says, and I quote, "They put me in a vat of liquid with other people. They told me to inhale the liquid, for it was to replace the air in my lungs for long space travel." Again, that's this theory that keeps coming up. Another MUFON case comes from Knoxville, Tennessee. A gentleman woke up around midnight to his bedroom, flooding with light. Next thing he knows, 6 hours have passed, and he's waking up naked in the forest behind his house, and goes back inside, and over the next few days or week or so, spontaneously recalls what happened. He remembers being hit by a beam of light and pulled into an object hovering over his house. Inside he saw short, elf-like figures. They had pretty much human features, but very tiny bodies and very large eyes. And he says that they put me into a container which quickly filled with a green liquid that I could somehow breathe in even when fully submerged. It's this weird UFO breathing pool. Dan Wright, the director of the MUFON Abduction Transcription Project, referenced at least 3 cases of this kind. Researcher Barbara Lamb certainly has a couple. She talks about one gentleman, Charles, who's had a lot of UFO experiences. He was taught healing. He was shown future disasters. And of course, at one point, he was put into one of these breathing pools. His theory was that it was somehow nutritional. He was very relaxed. It wasn't a fearful experience for him. He saw other people being put in these pools as well. He was able to breathe inside, which really surprised him. And he was also surprised that he had no fear and was so relaxed. So that may have been induced, perhaps. Barbara Lamb has another very astonishing case from an abductee by the name of Alice, who had a 3-day-long missing time experience. Did not know what happened over a period of 3 days. under hypnosis, recalled a very long UFO experience in which she was put into one of these breathing pools. In her case, it was shaped like a sphere, a metallic sphere. It had a little porthole, but it was filled with this liquid. It was about 8 feet wide, and they put her through an opening, put her in it through an opening on top. And she says she was in there for at least a couple of days. She was able to breathe. It was very relaxing, very meditative, and she kind of passed in and out of consciousness. And occasionally she would see these ETs, described as short figures wearing robes, peering in through a porthole. She was later taken to a meeting with other ETs, and other humans were there. There were other tanks. She was taken out. She saw other people being taken out of the tanks as well. She vomited up the liquid. It was pretty unpleasant, she said, but they dried her off, gave her a robe, took her and the other abductees to some sort of alien meeting where they talked about humanity's problems, really. Our problems with war, aggression, discrimination, pollution, nuclear proliferation, spiritual growth, these kinds of topics. Another case comes from, a very similar case, comes from researcher Albert Spiteri. A man was taken on board a UFO, undressed and put into a very large breathing pool. He said it was 50 feet wide with steep sloping sides, kind of like a funnel, metallic, and filled with this greenish, dark liquid. And says there was at least 15 other people in there. Most of them were panicking. One woman was screaming. Several were, says it was very deep. Several were underwater, so to speak. He tried to hover on the surface. He saw one man trying to climb out, and the man was hit with a beam of light, which pushed him back in. The ETs told the witness that this liquid was nutritional. You could eat it. It would sustain human life, and you could also breathe in it and expel human waste in it, that it recycled that. And the witness had the feeling that it was sort of like a holding tank, and that some of these people had been in there, not for hours or even days, but longer, weeks, months, or perhaps even longer than that. So yeah, there does seem to be some indication that these can be used as holding tanks, because people have seen certainly fetuses put in breathable tanks on board UFOs quite often. Another case comes from Nick Redfern, another pretty prominent UFO researcher. He talks about the case of Andrea, who was repeatedly abducted by short, dwarf-like humanoids. And from the very first time and every time she was put in one of these breathing pools, she panicked and was very fearful the first time, thought she was going to die. She said this thing had very thick liquid. It reminded her of nail polish, the smell of it, and was kind of like this giant bathtub, but found she could breathe in this thing. And following that, on subsequent abductions, she became pretty much used to it, because they always did it. And she theorizes that it's used, again, to protect her from gravitational forces, because on at least one occasion, she felt herself sloshing around pretty hard in one of these tanks. Nick Redford writes about another case of a man who actually woke up fully conscious and found himself inside one of these breathing pools. In his case, it was this huge tube filled with warm, greenish, glowing liquid. He had no idea how he had gotten there or where he was. Took him some time to get his bearing. He was floating in there and finally began to recall how he had been taken into a UFO from his home. At some point, he lost consciousness and woke up back in his home. So again, we don't know what these breathing pools are, but certainly there are theories, the main one being used for space travel. Researcher Ron Holtz, he's a scientist, has looked into these, and he believes what these breathing pools are perfluorocarbons. This is a super oxygenated liquid. You may have seen an example of this in the movie The Abyss. It allows a person to breathe underwater, much like Aquaman. It turns out these perfluorocarbons are super oxygenated liquid. They have more oxygen in them than the air itself, 65%, 3 times more than air. Very low surface tension, which allows it to sort of transfer oxygen into the bloodstream. So it has very strong wetting properties. Ron Holtz thought that perhaps because of this would allow the ETs to make very accurate volume measurements of the human body. So yeah, perhaps there are scientific reasons for this. Humans have done research into perfluorocarbons for many years. Back in 1965, Dr. Leland Clark pioneered experiments with this involving mice, who he was able to keep alive for many hours underwater. And I know there have been other experiments involving larger animals, such as sheep, and even more recently, there was a Russian experiment involving a dog who was kept alive for a short period of time. And the research in this is continuing. In 1989, an infant girl who was born premature was treated with perfluorocarbons and was able to be kept alive longer than they expected. As you may know, when a human embryo is in the womb, they are actually breathing liquids. So this is something that our bodies are, to a certain extent, naturally evolved to do. And there has been more research in a lot of prematurely born babies whose lungs are not developed enough yet. And so, for example, Thomas Schaefer did a study, Dr. Thomas Schaffer, and found that doctors were able to increase the survival rate of premature babies from 5% to upwards of 60%, a vast improvement. And for sure, our Navy has done research into perfluorocarbons to see if this can help diving. The experiments reportedly have not been super successful. These liquids cause quite a bit of stress on the lungs and are hard to breathe for long periods of time. So we don't know exactly what these are for. There's some possible MyLab cases, people who were abducted by the secret military and put through this. Helmut Lammer, sort of a MyLab researcher, talks about this. Krista Tilton, she's an abductee who was taken to a parent underground base, military base, alien base, said she saw humans floating in tanks. Helmut Lammer talks about a case of a lady by the name of Lisa who had this same experience. She said there were human military personnel there, and she was forced into this tank of golden yellow bubbly fluid and made to breathe it along with a number of other people. So yeah, this is what we call the UFO breathing pool. I did a study of these cases in my book, Not From Here, Volume 2. The purposes are unknown, but it seems, the explanation, at least as offered by the ETs, is to protect humans from gravitational forces. This is the only explanation the ETs have ever offered, though there does seem to be some indication that there are other purposes, such as possibly medicinal, decontamination, perhaps, nutritional, as some witnesses have thought, or even just storing humans, a human holding tank. And based on our own knowledge of perfluorocarbons, it does appear that this is what people are being submerged in, at least some form of perfluorocarbons. I think these cases are important because they show not only they give a window into the ET agenda, they show how advanced ETs are with technology and, for that matter, their knowledge of the human body. So that's it for now. That's my take on the UFO breathing pool. Thanks for listening and keep having fun.